Battleground New York City, the fight for your vote. Your front row seat to the battle for New York's next mayor. It's the old guard clinging to power, chasing a candidate they never saw coming. Every night, our experts break it down.
What New Yorkers want above all else is authenticity.
We're listening to the people who matter most, you, the voters. And when the candidates sit across from us, nothing's off the table. What's your plan to make New York City feel like a safer city?
S.E. Cupp, that's your perception. Of course, there's a lot of crime.
So what's happening right now? Let's dive in. Welcome to Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. It's Thursday, October 30th, Halloween Eve. We're just 5 days now. 5 days, one hand, five fingers, 5 days away from this all-important New York City mayoral race. It has flown by, at least for me. Later in today's show, we're going to talk to an expert on the youth vote and whether they'll be decisive in this election. But first, as always, let's get to some news. Joining me now is Joe Anuta, reporter for Politico covering City Hall. Welcome back, Joe.
Thank you.
So I want to begin with my favorite thing. It's a new poll. Marist University released its latest poll on the race last night, and it shows Zohran Mamdani with a 16-point lead over Andrew Cuomo. He's at 48%. Now, we know that Cuomo got a bump after Eric Adams dropped out, but unless something seismic happens, Joe, in the next 5 days, his chances seem to be going in the wrong direction at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, to me, the polling's been pretty static, honestly. Mamdani has been leading Cuomo by double digits for weeks, if not months. I do agree that Cuomo got a bump when Eric Adams ended his campaign. And I think he's picking up Republican support, which has really been his strategy as of late. But it just doesn't seem to be enough. These polls are not moving all that much.
They aren't, and I always have to caution when we talk about polls. They're polls. They get it wrong. They got the primary wrong. So on the other hand, Joe, I don't think it's crazy to suggest that the race might be a lot tighter the day after the election than these polls are showing today, because polls could underpoll large voting blocks. They could be missing a bunch of Cuomo or Sliwa voters, no?
I mean, I agree that it's very hard for these pollsters to model this general election. You know, they're usually pretty sleepy affairs. And when they build these models, they work off past elections. This really isn't an election like any other in recent history. Usually the Democratic nominee walks away with the general election win. And so I totally agree. I think it's not crazy at all to think that we will see different results on election night than we're seeing in the polls. Whether that breaks for Cuomo or Mamdani, I don't know. You know, in the primary, obviously they very much undercounted Mamdani's support among younger voters and a lot of other blocs. So I don't know enough to say either way, but I think you're right that, you know, it's tough to really get a beat on this, I think, for the pollsters.
Yeah, I think, listen, Mamdani could win, but by less of a margin, right? That's fully possible. As we know, I just always caution, the polls are snapshots, okay? And even though there's only 5 days left, the polls could be an unrepresentative snapshot even. So we've just got to give that a little breathing room. But in some good news for Andrew Cuomo last night, he got a pretty big endorsement from a former mayor, a popular one, a well-liked one, Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who wrote this in a social media post. 4 months ago, I endorsed Andrew Cuomo because I thought his management experience and government know-how made him the best choice for New Yorkers. I still do. And today, with early voting underway, I wanted to reiterate my support for Andrew Cuomo. Being mayor of New York City is the second toughest job in America, and the next mayor will face immense challenges. Andrew Cuomo has the experience and toughness to stand up for New Yorkers and get things done. I hope you will join me in supporting him. Joe, how impactful could this kind of last-minute endorsement be for Andrew Cuomo?
I'm not sure it makes that big of a difference. I'm not sure who the voter is who's been sitting on the fence for months and, you know, is going to be swayed by Mike Bloomberg in the last, a couple of days before the election after hundreds of thousands of people have already voted. I think the Democratic voter field is pretty well settled by this point. And, I think the endorsements for Cuomo from people like John Katzmatidis or Sid Rosenberg, who were backers, that's been much more
Right.
impactful to his campaign, I think, than having moderate Democrats endorse him. Cuomo is a moderate Democrat. I don't think he needs Mike Bloomberg to tell people to vote for him.
Well, but speaking of, he got another one, another moderate Democrat, Tom Suozzi, who's a moderate Democrat congressman in New York. He also gave Cuomo his endorsement, but it was mostly an anti-Mamdani endorsement. Let's take a look. He says, "I'm a Democratic capitalist, not a Democratic socialist. I endorse Andrew Cuomo. I cannot back a declared socialist with a thin resume to run the most complex city in America. We need leaders who will fight crime, not undermine the police, who will create jobs, not harm the economy, who will keep taxes down, not make it more expensive for middle class families to live here." I totally get, Joe, your argument that moderate Democrats backing a moderate Democrat is like, not news.
Right, right.
But is there an argument to be made about momentum? And in this last moment of the race, sort of shoring up some of these endorsements is momentum. Feel free to disagree. I'm just bringing up sort of a devil's argument.
And I honestly think the Suozzi endorsement was more about Suozzi than it was about Cuomo or Mamdani. I think, and maybe we can talk about this a little later, but I think Mamdani is proving very divisive in the Democratic Party writ large, and you have sort of swing state, purple district, more moderate Democrats who are very much want to put distance between themselves and the person who is likely going to be the next mayor of the New York City. And I think Suozzi is one of them, and that's where that endorsement's coming from.
I think you're 100% right. I like Tom Suozzi, but this sounded to me like Tom Suozzi was saying, "I'm no Mamdani. I just want you to know I'm not with this guy, so I'll be with this other guy." I read it the same way. Okay, Joe, I've got more questions for you, so don't go anywhere. More Battleground NYC after the break.
All right, thank you.
We're back with more Battleground NYC. Let's get back to more news from the campaign trail with Joe Anuta, reporter for Politico covering City Hall. Joe, today in Politico, your colleagues have a piece focused on Mamdani's rise. It's a rise they called meteoric but polarizing. Explain.
I think it's polarizing basically in two ways. I think if you just look at the general electorate, as we talked about before, this is a very sort of bitter, unusual general election. Typically in New York City, just by virtue of the voter registration breakdown, the Democratic nominee shoo-in to win the general election. The fact that Cuomo can exist as an independent candidate and be, even somewhat viable speaks to deep divisions, I think, in New York City electorate between people who are very wary of a democratic socialist, who don't like Mamdani because of his past statements about the NYPD, who don't like what he has to say about Israel and the war in the Middle East. And I think, that's obviously showing up in the poll numbers. I think he's also divisive in that the national Democratic leaders are very, I think, unsure about how to treat this. A lot of people see him as the future of the party, but you have people who want him nowhere near the party. Cuomo says all the time, he accuses him of not being a Democrat, despite the fact he won the Democratic primary. And I think,
just to your point, sorry to interrupt, but like divisive in that, like he wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to win. And so that's divided the party too. Like, what do we do about this?
Right.
Okay. It feels very similar, this rise, which was meteoric. Also, it feels similar to Obama's rise, right? Going from junior senator in Illinois to the presidential nominee, but he was similarly polarizing. Now, he won 2 terms. Can those two things, meteoric and polarizing, actually work to build a really impressive, important candidate?
Yeah, I think change is always polarizing. So I think the proof, will be in how he governs. And I think it's going to be very tough. You have a federal government that's very eager to send in national troops and just to stick its nose more in New York City's business if Mamdani is elected. You have this sort of faction that has been with Cuomo that's really never been on board with his candidacy. And you have a lot of huge promises that are very expensive that he has promised his base that he's going to do. And, the farther left I think you go in the Democratic Party, the sort of less forgiving that base is when they don't get what you told them you were going to give them. So I think he has a lot of different constituencies that are going to be pulling him in different directions. And we'll have to see how he handles it and how he governs.
Yeah, if he wins, it's going to be really interesting to watch for all the reasons, both internally inside New York City, but also nationally. In these final days, Joe, it seems like Andrew Cuomo's trying a kitchen sink approach. There's been sort of ugly mudslinging at Mamdani over his ethnicity and religion in recent weeks, but also a new ad where Andrew Cuomo's a bit more hopeful in tone. He's trying to get Republicans while also proclaiming that he's the only true Democrat in the race. Could this work, this kitchen sink approach, or does it feel a little unfocused and maybe even a little like he's trying to be all things to all people in these last moments?
I mean, I think certainly there is a concerted effort to win more Republican votes. He's been going on Fox News all the time. He's been
Yeah.
getting these Sliwa backers to defect over to his side. And I think, that's kind of the only viable strategy he has. I think his notion that he's the real Democrat doesn't make a lot of sense. He handily lost the Democratic primary. So I don't know how he credibly says that. I think he is a real Democrat of, a certain era that, at least for now, seems to be over in New York City Democratic politics.
Wow. Yeah. You mentioned Sliwa. The city is reporting that he's managed to carve out a bit of support for himself in neighborhoods along the Brooklyn and Queens border. What can you tell us about the groups there and why they're supporting Sliwa?
I think there's always been a very dedicated Republican voting bloc in New York City. Sliwa got 30% of the vote in the last general election against Eric Adams. And so these people, I think a lot of them realize they're not going to be picking the winner here, but they take a certain amount of pride, I think, in having a protest vote to say, look, not everyone is on board with these democratic policies in the city, and you need to think of, hundreds of thousands of people who aren't. It's not an insignificant amount of people who voted for him last time and are sort of split between him and Cuomo this time.
Yeah, listen, as a former Republican in New York City, I made a number of those protest votes, knowing that they were just for me. They were for posterity. But I think you're right on that. Joe Anuta, always great to see you. And thanks for your reporting. And thanks for coming on for analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, and when we come back, younger voters, will they be the deciding factor in this election? Stay tuned. More Battleground NYC after the break. We're back with Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote. Joining me now for the bigger picture is David Burstein, author of Fast Future, How the Millennial Generation is Shaping Our World. David, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here. Good to be with you.
All right. 5 days. We are at the final, the 11th hour here. It's really exciting. And you joined me at the beginning of our run of Battleground. And so I wanted to follow up with you on younger voters now that we're sort of at the end. They were so instrumental in the primary. Could they be a decisive factor in the general as well?
I think so. I mean, you're already seeing it, right? You're seeing the record turnout, and no doubt that we obviously don't have the exact numbers on that yet, but and what demos those things are, but no doubt those are driven in part by younger voters. New York City mayoral elections are notorious for their very, very low participation and turnout over the years. And we certainly have seen young people getting involved, and it's really on both sides. I mean, I think there's a lot of young Jewish people in this city who've been very energized by this race. Most of those people seem to be breaking for Cuomo, but there's a lot of other young people in across other demographic sectors who are really breaking for Mamdani. And you saw over this weekend, Bernie Sanders, AOC, Mamdani all rallying out in Forest Hills, where many New Yorkers have been to enjoy not political figures in the past,
right?
And they packed it, and Governor Hochul showed up to try to catch a little bit of the youth energy as she thinks about her reelection next year, which is no doubt what's going on there. But young people are going to play a big role for sure.
We have seen the record turnout for early voting, but it's been skewing toward older voters. Not all, but more older voters than I think people were expecting. And based on what you know of this younger demographic, is that a warning sign for Mamdani, or is there an explanation as to why they may just be waiting?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to see, obviously, election day still does have, I mean, we've seen this in the various elections, a shift towards more and more people early voting. I think it's a little bit different in a place like New York than it is nationally, where I would expect those trends to continue. But I think young people are going to show up in this cycle. I don't think that's a particular warning sign, I wouldn't say. But older voters are also showing up in larger numbers.
Yep.
I think everyone is going to turn out for this election. There's been so much attention, which frankly is a good thing for democracy.
It is. It's super healthy. I love it. So it was Mamdani's proposals and promises, as you know, especially around affordability, that got him a lot of support among young voters. And in these final weeks, the Cuomo and Sliwa campaigns, along with their surrogates, have really tried to make Mamdani's promises seem naive or even crazy. In the second debate, I think they really hammered him on that in particular. Do young people care about how practical things like his ability to get stuff done, do they care about that, or is it more the aspiration of what he can do?
Look, we have fully moved into the vibes election era of American politics, right? That happened in 2024, and it's going to happen, I think, on an ongoing basis. I think that young people in particular, but I think this is true of all voters, are looking to buy into a dream. They're looking to buy into a vision. And the person selling that dream and that vision is always going to do better than the person who's saying, here's the loophole in the dream and why it's not going to work. I think that's an old playbook, frankly, that used to be much more effective in American politics in the 90s and early 2000s, but just doesn't work anymore in this intention environment where Mamdani is able to command so much more attention for his ideas and his vision than Cuomo is able to command for being able to say, and here's the reason why it can't be paid for. No one wants to hear that.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. Young people in New York City today are in an affordability crisis and a housing crisis. Yes, we know this, but maybe even more importantly, they're in a jobs crisis. They cannot find good jobs. Just go on TikTok. I'm on TikTok all the time. Go on TikTok. You'll see Gen Zer after Gen Zer posting about their expensive college degrees and then going to like their bartending job or their landscaping job because there just aren't jobs. I haven't heard this issue of unemployment among young voters discussed a lot in this race.
No, I mean, I think it's interesting. The conversation has really been about housing and affordability as opposed to employment. I think part of that is a recognition that what the mayor can do about unemployment is less than what they can do about housing, right? But I also think that housing in New York City and affordability of living in New York City has been such an issue for so long. And I think New York, young people and voters in New York are really, really frustrated because this is now the third or fourth mayoral election in a row where someone says, we're going to fix affordable housing. And it hasn't happened. And childcare too. I'm a parent. You're a parent. You know the impact of this, even though fewer millennials are having kids than their peers. That is affecting a lot of young people too. So I think people are particularly clued into those things, which just feel more tangible than the employment issue. But I think that's why it's getting short shrift. But I agree, it should have more to it.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. How do you talk about it when it's not a problem you can offer a direct solution for? But I'm sure someone like Mamdani, who's very creatively minded, could come up with some things. But it's a little late. Maybe it'll come up in the next election. I've got more questions for you, David, so don't go anywhere. More Battleground NYC after the break. We're back with Battleground NYC one more time with David Burstein, author of Fast Future, How the Millennial Generation is Shaping Our World. David, I was looking at some numbers today. A new Economist YouGov poll has Trump's approval among Gen Z cratering. He's gone from a +8 net approval in February to a -55 net approval this month. That is a 63-point swing in the wrong direction. That's just a giant swing. Gen Z, as you know, was instrumental in getting Trump reelected in 2024, but they were also a huge factor in the 2022 midterms, which benefited Democrats. Looking at this New York City race and the enthusiasm among Gen Z for Mamdani, what predictions would you make about the 2026 midterm elections and this voting bloc?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a group that will be engaged, able to be engaged in supporting the Democratic nominee. However, and it's a big however, that nominee has to actually go out and contend and engage and excite those people, because the general polling numbers are great, but that doesn't indicate whether those people will actually be motivated to actually turn out and vote at the levels that are necessary. There's no question they'll win, that the Democratic nominee will win that demo, but I think the actual concern for in Trump's part, among I would say is what happens. Is Trump, is someone like a Marco Rubio or a JD Vance actually able to appeal to, more younger people than Trump is, right? Is someone like that able to sell themselves to those people? I don't know. We have a lot of questions about how the MAGA legacy, is going to taint or not taint that person, if that person's going to be able to be viewed more favorably than Trump. So it's so hard to see how that post-Trump landscape plays out. But what we know about young voters is that candidates have to actually contest them in order to turn them out. They can't just count on their support. And that's true of every demographic group. Frankly, for the Democrats are losing support amongst. I mean, Kamala Harris, remember, got 68% of the vote in New York, which was down like 11%, I think it was, from where Joe Biden was in the previous cycle. So, you got to keep, like, that's a pretty significant, amount of votes to lose in a place like New York City.
Yeah, and broadening it out, she won young voters by just 4 points.
Right.
Joe Biden in 2020 won them by 25 points.
Exactly.
So she lost a lot of young voters. I mean, she and Joe Biden, I think, lost a lot of young voters over the course of his term. But it's a problem for Democrats.
I mean, there's obviously been a lot said about this, but that the Obama coalition is now the Trump coalition is the most terrifying piece of information for any Democratic strategist. I mean,
well, it's very damning.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's that is not an indictment of Trump. It's an indictment of Democrats, right?
Yeah.
That is, it's not a validation of Trump. It's about a failure to provide a quality alternative to the least popular political candidate in history, which would seem to be table stakes to be a major organized political party in this country. But it hasn't worked.
We know young people care about the economy, but they also care about things like climate change and abortion and democracy, things that just weren't big enough priorities to enough people to help Democrats win in 2024. Do Dems need to zero in on these issues that matter to young people to win those young voters back? Or would you tell them, no, focus on the top issues, economy, crime, immigration, that will trickle down to young voters?
I think it's the latter. I mean, I think, the best campaign is one that appeals to, the most people. The question is about really going to where young voters have to speak. Young voters hate this thing where people go and they talk to young people about youth issues.
Yes. Hello, young people.
Right? They want to be treated like serious voters in serious parts of the country. I don't really think ultimately that people say, young voters voted for Trump because they are crypto investors and they thought he had a good policy in crypto. Like, I would defy people to actually find me some statistic that says how many people voted. Because of their crypto wallet and their policy. I'm sure there were some, but not enough that are statistically significant. So, keeping the focus on those big issues, that is got to be the way for Democrats to be able to go forward. No question.
Is there room for moderates in the youth vote universe? If someone had the impression that young voters are either all far left progressives or far right MAGA, would they be rightish?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, because I think no one is a monolith, but and so I would say that 49% of the country identifies as independents right now, right? In most of the recent survey, I think you probably have the same thing about young voters. I haven't seen most recent polling data on that, but I wouldn't be surprised to see that it was about the same. Young voters are contestable and up for grabs. And that's what these candidates in New York and across the country have to keep remembering, that these voters are not, and this is the beginning of them being locked in, right? They're still up for grabs and they have to be fought for and contested.
David Burstein, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Pleasure.
And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you one more time tomorrow before the weekend. And this race really kicks off next week. Thanks for tuning into Battleground NYC.